Good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are listening to this. We are delighted and honored that you're taking this time to join us in this virtual town hall meeting Vote 2020. Needless to say, there's no way to start other than to talk about the reality out there that we're all dealing with of a virus that has us, as you can see even in these pictures, and it is in your homes. People are safely, hopefully, separated. This is a way to bring us together. I'm David Elcott, professor at Wagner School of Public Service. The real purpose of this is to remind us there is a future. There is something after COVID-19, and that something is incredibly important. We are at a liminal moment in history in which democracy is being challenged in so many different ways. And your role as a citizen of the United States or a citizen of other countries, as many of you are, have a responsibility, a unique responsibility at a particular moment in history to defend the very democracy that in which we've been privileged to live, a democracy that protects the human and civil rights of each of us and of others, including the most vulnerable in our population. So this evening, our goal is to excite you, to motivate you, and to empower you. And to do that, we have some remarkable and important speakers who are able to share this with you. Meanwhile, a reminder that you can, in fact, ask questions, and Professor John Gershman will be looking at those questions, and we'll come back and ask our panelists at the end of the formal speaking, we'll ask them to respond. It is an honor and privilege to be able to introduce the president of our university, President Hamilton, who is going to welcome us. And after that, we will hear from our speakers.
David, thank you very much indeed. And let me also thank the Wagner School of Public Service and the many NYU schools and centers who are participating and especially co-sponsoring this event. As David mentioned, here we are gathered together by Zoom, and it's a little bit surreal to be taking part in a discussion on civic engagement at a time when we can't talk to each other in person, when we can't canvass for the political candidate of our choice, when our very ability to vote is now suddenly in question. The coronavirus has complicated how we participate in a democracy at a crucial moment in the civic life of this country. So this is a timely and a very important discussion. At NYU, as a university very much dedicated to public service and dedicated to civic engagement locally, nationally, and internationally, we are very proud to host this discussion. And we are also very proud to welcome three distinguished panelists this evening, and they will provide valuable insight from both New York and Washington, and also from across the political spectrum. Let me now introduce our first panelists, Congresswoman Nita Lowey. Nita Lowey is a native New Yorker. She is now serving her 16th term in Congress. And since her election in 1988, she's emerged as a leading advocate for quality healthcare, for biomedical research, for environmental protection, for women's issues, and for homeland security preparedness. And I should note that Congresswoman Lowey has also been a long advocate for better pandemic preparedness, authoring legislation to create a comprehensive pandemic plan following the 2009 swine flu outbreak. But especially near and dear to NYU is Congresswoman Lowey's championing of education. As chair of the House Appropriations Committee, she's been instrumental in making sure that universities with a high number of Pell eligible students received a fair share of the funding in the recent Federal CARES Act legislation. And NYU, as a university that educates a very high proportion of Pell eligible students compared to our peer institutions, we at NYU appreciate enormously the critical importance of this legislation to our student body and to students across the spectrum in universities around the United States. So thank you, Congressman Lowey. Thank you. We are thrilled that you could be with us this evening. And please, may I ask everyone on this Zoom gathering tonight to give a virtual, but still a very enthusiastic NYU welcome to Congresswoman Nita Lowey.
Thank you, President Hamilton, for that wonderful introduction. While I wish we could all be together in person, it is a pleasure to join you virtually this evening. My life and career, even before I was elected to Congress, has been largely inspired by my mother's activism in the Bronx, New York, and a lesson she often repeated. She taught me at a time when the idea of women seeking public office was almost unimaginable. I'm not sure my mother realized that something I could do one day would be to run for Congress. After all, women quite literally had no place in Washington. As an intern in 1958, I couldn't even find a ladies' room. But in 1989, I was sworn into the United States Congress, one of 31 women serving in the United States Senate and House of Representatives, 31 out of 535. And in 2007, my friend Nancy Pelosi was sworn in as the first woman Speaker of the House. Even with this progress toward giving women a seat at the table, our success and tireless work toward a fairer, more just society is under siege. When President Trump was elected in 2016, oh, I was angry and scared. I feared the progress we made as a nation was at risk, but thankfully I wasn't alone. Women, men, children descended upon Washington, New York City, and major cities around the world and demanded to be heard. Thanks to this activism, we seized the moment and put in motion the energy and passion that resulted in November 2018's election and historic victories for women and minority communities nationwide. Today, because of that activism, I stand here as a proud member of the Democratic House majority. And I'm glad they added more ladies' rooms, because today 126 women serve in the Congress, 25 in the Senate, 101 in the House, more than 4 times since when I arrived 31 years ago. For the first time in history, the House Appropriations Committee is not led by men. And I'm the first woman to chair the committee, and with my colleague Kay Granger serving as the top Republican appropriator, this is the first time in more than 40 years that 2 women have led any House committee. And that, mind you, was the Select Committee on the House Beauty Shop. But progress cannot stop here. After the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School shooting, students and young people across the country joined together in an inspiring way to make their voices heard. In many ways, their movement has been successful. The parents of 2 14-year-old students who were killed ran for school board, and one of them won. Multiple states passed red flag laws, and students have proven their voices cannot be ignored. But gun control at the national level remains largely unchanged, stymied by partisan gridlock. Many of my Republican colleagues remain silent as Democrats in Congress called once again for common sense legislation like universal background checks and a ban on assault-style weapons. And today, as I help lead my fellow House Democrats in the fight to put families first in coronavirus relief packages, I am constantly reminded that we only have control of 1/2 of one of the branches of government. Just this week, Democrats had to fight to flip an insufficient Republican plan that would have left behind hospitals, frontline workers, vulnerable small businesses suffering in the wake of the COVID-19 outbreak. But because we heard from thousands and thousands of businesses who couldn't get the assistance they needed, and we read the headlines and spoke to the hospitals about the dire situation with PPE and crowding, we knew we had to act, and we had the public sentiment with us. So instead, we successfully pushed for a package that strengthens the Paycheck Protection Program for small businesses, provides $25 billion for coronavirus testing, and $75 billion for resources to the front lines, including personal protective equipment. Our nation's battle with COVID-19 has further opened our eyes to the damage and loss of lives that can occur without a competent leader in the White House. President Trump's inability to act quickly and decisively has led to the further spread of the coronavirus throughout the United States. His firing of independent spending watchdogs threatens the proper use of over $2 trillion in federal aid to fight this pandemic, and his refusal to support the World Health Organization with US dollars ignores Congress's constitutional authority and threatens global health for decades to come. 2020 is our chance to change this. Powerful activism is far more than protests and marches. It's about letters, phone calls to your representative, and conversations with community leaders. Throughout my career, conversations I've had with small business owners, environmental activists, and immigrants from around the world while at the grocery store or a district event have inspired me to introduce new legislation or fight harder for federal support for certain programs. Civic engagement is asking your parents, your partners, your friends, your roommates, if they have a plan to vote, and it's about showing up Tuesday, November 3rd, 2020 to cast your ballot, or in this COVID-19 world, making sure that they all have their absentee ballots completed and mailed. I'm retiring this year, but my mother's words still ring true. I'm going to continue my activism. Just as it started long before my career in Congress, it will continue after I close my office doors for the last time. So keep fighting. Your voice is influential and you deserve to be heard. Have a great rest of the meeting. David, it's a pleasure to have been with you. And I thank you for inviting me to share some words. Have a great rest of the conference.
Thank you, Congresswoman Lowey, for joining us and for your many years of dedication and service to the people of New York. Welcome, everybody. My name is David Aronov, and I am the president of the Wagner Student Association. I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker. Javier Valdes is co-executive director of Make the Road New York and Make the Road Action. Most recently, he led Make the Road New York's team in securing historic victories for immigrant and tenant New Yorkers, including the New York State DREAM Act and restoration of driver's licenses for all. In his role as chair of the board, he helps lead the Center for Popular Democracy, which works to create equity, opportunity, and a dynamic democracy in partnership with high-impact base-building organizations, organizing alliances, and progressive unions. In 2013, President Barack Obama awarded Javier the White House Champions of Change Cesar Chavez Award. He is also the secretary of the Working Families Party in New York State. We are excited to welcome and turn it over to our very own NYU Wagner alumnus tonight, Javier Valdes.
Thank you so much for doing that, and I appreciate the invitation. Thank you, President Hamilton, for having me tonight. Particular thank you to David, who some of you need to know is that has been helping our community in desperate need in Westchester by delivering food all this time. So David, from bottom of my heart, thank you for everything you're doing. I'm gonna share our PowerPoint. I created a couple of slides that I thought it would be helpful to share a little bit more about Make the Road. Again, my name is Javier Valdes. I'm the co-executive director of Make the Road New York and Make the Road Action. You can learn more about our organization by visiting our social media tags there. We are an immigrant-based community-based organization. We have over 25,000 members in New York State. These are dues-paying members that make up constituencies all across the state. We operate 5 community centers, 3 in New York City. We are in Port Richmond, Staten Island, Jackson Heights, Queens, and Bushwick, Brooklyn. We also have an office in Long Island. We do operate an office in Brentwood, Long Island, and then we're also in White Plains, Westchester. We also have sister organizations in other states. We operate in Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Nevada, and New Jersey. The purpose of our institution is to build collective power to push for systemic change. How is it that we come together, think through the issues, and try to resolve it? We have a deep understanding that the best way, the people that are closest to the pain are the best people in deciding how to relieve that pain. And that's what Make the Road comes from. Our name comes from a poem that says, "Wanderer, there is no road. We make the road by walking." And that's what we intend to do, that we're working together to change this country. All right. So we have different strategies of how we do this work. We do organizing. Here you see a picture of an action that we did on May 1st, several years back. Organizing is core to who we are. Again, we are in the power building process. We want to make sure that people that have been left out of the political equation are coming together and are being heard. From there, we do policy innovation. Again, we deeply think that the people that are most impacted are the ones that are able to kind of think through and about the changes that we need to do. Since we are a power building institution, sometimes power manifests itself in the short term when our people don't have heat or hot water, or the wages are being stolen, or they don't know English in order to push back against an employer. So we actually do provide survival services where we have a strong legal team that's helping people navigate housing court, Department of Labor, et cetera, so the member can be with us in the longer term of building power in our institution. We work on many issues. Immigrant and civil rights is one of our core issues that we work on, representing a very diverse constituency here in New York State. What's interesting is that each one of our community centers really represents the diversity of that community center, primarily Black and brown working class communities. We do a lot of work on housing, environmental justice, education, workplace justice. And just a tidbit, we probably represent the largest transgender community, Latinx community in New York State. Jackson Heights is home to a thriving and successful transgender community, and we are one of the organizations that helps support and lead them. And we're also a very intergenerational organization, working with young people, offering after-school programming and programming within schools in the 4 of our 5 community centers. One thing that we have been able to do is really thinking about how do we engage our community and how do we actually help change the political leverage that we have in order to elect people that are more reflective of our constituencies, but also support our values and our policies. In New York State, since we began our civic engagement work, we've been able to knock on more than 200,000 doors and completed over 20,000 voter registrations in the last year. That level of work has really allowed us to engage people from all across New York State. And one of the most powerful ways that we are able to do so is that sometimes we're able to engage our members. Some of them are mixed status, and they're able to kind of move and persuade other members, primarily from our community, to vote and to keep them in mind as they're thinking about voting. It's very powerful. I remember we recently did, in 2018, a canvas in Staten Island, talking to voters in Staten Island, and our dreamers were the ones that were doing the canvassing. And for a lot of people that they were talking to in Staten Island, it was the first time they actually met somebody that was undocumented. And then that interaction actually sometimes led for them to kind of grow awareness about their experiences and what they have gone through. And sometimes we were able to change their minds. Nationally, the 2020 election is one of the most critical elections for us. And we're hoping that we are able to knock on 700,000 doors across 5 states this year. Everything is changing now with COVID-19. We'll figure out how to do that via phone or digital, but our hope is to do that, and to do that in Pennsylvania and Nevada in particular. So why is it important to do this, and what has been the change, or what has happened since we've been able to do that, is that we have been able to change some of the policies and politics of our state. In Long Island, here are some 4 examples in Long Island alone. We've been doing voter registration drives, trying to increase voter turnout. Studies have shown drastically that if you engage a new American, somebody who just became a citizen of this country, into voting, you register them and you get them to vote in that election, the likelihood of them voting in future elections increases tremendously. So we really are trying to get people in that moment. Here is one of our longstanding members. They called him the Johnny Appleseed of voter registration, because he worked for 4 months just going all around Long Island registering voters. He's a Salvadorian immigrant, a TPS holder, and he was really much engaging his own community about the power to vote. And we have been helpful in the margins and electing different people by having increased turnout. So this is some of the things that we think that communities of color sometimes are dismissed or not prioritized by either political party. And so our job is to engage them, politicize them, and have them turn out to vote and exercise that power that they have. Let me talk a little bit about the current state of play here in the state of New York and how it's impacting us. I think everybody has seen the numbers. They probably might be already out of date based on the new numbers that the governor put out, but over 250,000 confirmed COVID cases, 13,000 confirmed deaths, the 85 hospitalized have at least one chronic health condition. And unfortunately, in New York City in particular, Black and Latinx residents are dying at twice the rate of white people. And Latinx residents comprise 34% of COVID deaths, which is the largest single group. It's sad for me to say, but here in New York, we as Make the Road have already lost 28 members to COVID-19 in the last 4 weeks. So this is something that's hit us home, has hit us deeply, and it's a hard moment for our community because we're not able to come together to support each other and be in one place as we're thinking through how do we deal with this. There was a recent article in the New York Times that talked a little bit about this, where it was saying that a tragedy is unfolding, that the epicenter continues to be Elmhurst, Corona, and Jackson Heights. That's where I think a lot of people have seen the stories of what's going on in Elmhurst Hospital and the impact that they're having in our community. There's no other way to do it, to explain it other than it's brutal what we're seeing and the impact that it's having. So we were dismayed by what was able to happen in Congress. They've gone through, now they're saying there's 3.5 legislative packages to provide support to the United States. One of the things is that you see how the $3 billion breaks down. We created this chart for you all to see, and you can see where the priorities are across the board. One of the things that was very hard for us to swallow, and it was frustrating and just hard overall, was that the undocumented community, people that are paying taxes, have been filing taxes and paying taxes, have been excluded from getting any support from the federal government. And the impact that has is tremendous. The folks that, the family members that I've been able to engage with, who has lost loved ones, I remember 4 of them telling me that the reason that their husband or the breadwinner was contacted COVID and then passed away from it was because they were not able to access any relief and they had to work. They're the frontline workers. They're the ones that are delivering groceries. working at the grocery store, healthcare workers, supporting others, elderly. They are putting their health at risk every day in order to provide for their families, and that has really led for them to be exposed to the virus, and since then has passed away. We know that the coronavirus does not discriminate against people, but government policies have done so. So this is some of the things that have come from our community, right? They don't have food security. They don't know where they're going to eat. They're concerned about paying for rent. The hospitals are overwhelmed, etc. And you know, it's a lot of issues that's impacting our community. So just to conclude, so what are we doing? I think there are several things that we're trying to do, and how do we engage our community in this time. I already talked about the civic engagement and how do we talk to people that are directly impacted, communities at large, to really push forward and get involved in the political arena and engage in exercising the right to vote. Because we are doing this thing that's called the cacerolazo, which we grab pots and pans every Friday at 2 o'clock, and we welcome all of you to join us to really call what has been going on in our community, and to say that we cannot continue to be excluded from any government program. We cannot get out of this crisis with a GoFundMe site. We've been able to do that with the generous support of David and many others to put a Band-Aid on the issue, but we need to think bigger and really think of ways of getting out of this mess. And the way to do that is the government has to step in and provide. So if you want to know more about Make the Road, I urge you all to check out our website, maketheroadny.org, or you can see the work that we're doing at coronavirus-ny.org, or you can text ROAD to the number on the screen, and you will be then getting more information about who we are and what we do. I think in this moment it's critical for us to be engaged, be in community, and again, very much appreciative to many of you that have come forward and helped us provide relief in this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Javier. I'm actually very familiar with Make the Road in Queens, and they do great work. So we also look forward to hearing from you more during our Q&A at the end of the program. It is now my pleasure to introduce Ron Christie. Ron Christie, founder and president of Christie Strategies, LLC, is a veteran senior advisor of both the White House and Congress. Christie served as a resident fellow at the Institute of Politics at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University in 2011. He was appointed as an adjunct professor at the McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown University in 2014. He currently is also a lecturer at NYU's Washington, D.C. campus. Christie is the author of several books, including Black Words: How Black Leadership is Returning America to the Days of Separate but Equal, Acting White: The Birth and Death of a Racial Slur, and Black in the White House. Christie is also a co-founder of NoLabels.org, a nonpartisan group seeking real policy solutions in Washington, D.C., and a co-host of No Labels Radio, heard each Saturday on Sirius XM, POTUS Channel 124. It is now my pleasure to turn it over to Ron Christie.
Well, David, thank you very, very much for that kind introduction. And I want to say thank you to President Andy Hamilton. It's always nice to see you. Thank you for your leadership in these challenging times. And I particularly want to thank David Elcott for this invitation to join you here in the United States and those students who are joining us on Zoom from around the world. I too, like Javier, would like to share my screen with you and to run through a very brief PowerPoint presentation with you to give you a real sense of how can you become engaged? What sort of steps can you take right now in these uncertain times to make sure that your voice is heard and that your activism and your civic engagement counts now more than ever? As mentioned, I love teaching the American presidency at NYU, and my students, if they're interviewed on this PowerPoint presentation, you see this at the start of every class. So what are the facts of young voter participation? How do we translate that interest, that activism, and to educated voters, not only within your own family and your own household, but those in your community around you? And finally, what can you do in the days ahead to make sure that those voices are heard? And I put this slide up, and all these slides, I would point out, will be made available to you should you have the interest of obtaining them. Given the amount of time that we have, I can't hit every point, every graph, but it's important for you to recognize that historically younger voters have had the lowest voting rates out of all age groups here in the United States within the last several decades. However, if you look at the 2018 midterm elections, college students started really voting in a more accelerated pattern. And you see that it jumped, I should say, several percentage points from where it had been in 2014. What does this mean, and why is this important? If you look around the country, in Texas, in Florida, in Nevada, look at the number of people who either filed to make sure that they could get an early ballot to vote, or those individuals who actually did vote early. So it's the notion of, we didn't really think that our voices matter, we didn't really think that our voices were heard, but now these young voters, these folks in the 18 to 25-year-old demographic have recognized that they are really a force to be reckoned with. And you can see here that while youth turnout in Super Tuesday states was a little bit lower than expected, there were a lot of young folks in the 18 to 29 demographic who showed up and, by and large, voted for Senator Bernie Sanders and his platform. But I want you to see in the next couple of slides here that Generation Z, and I know that we don't like labels, but if you look at the folks who are younger, they now comprise the largest voting bloc by percentage of population of any other group. The silent folks, 71 and up, the baby boomers, myself and Generation X. And I think now is the time that younger voters need to recognize that this is the opportunity for them to really engage with public policymakers at all levels of the government, state, local, and federal. And you see here that younger voters predominantly lean towards the Democratic Party, with only 33% of millennials leaning towards Republicans. As a proud Republican, as a conservative, as one who has been involved in public service and in public life for my entire career, I think these numbers are probably a little bit lower. And I applaud President Hamilton, and I applaud the faculty at NYU for trying to foster an environment that really allows people, regardless of their political affiliation, to feel comfortable in class, to feel comfortable with their classmates and able to express their own views. So I say this to those of you who are Democrats, those of you who are independents, but also those of you who are conservatives, that your voice matters as much as everyone else in our community. And here you notice that in 2020, that young voters make up 37% of the eligible population, nearly 40%. And what an amazing opportunity, again, to shape the direction of our country. And so if you look at the past Democratic primary, the 2020 candidates did devote resources specifically to appeal to young people. Why? They're looking at the numbers, same as I am, same as you are, that 37% of the eligible voting population, that's not something to be overlooked. It's not just the baby boomers anymore whose voices need to be heard. You see, of course, that folks are on Snapchat, they are looking at Facebook, they're looking at online resources to identify and solicit younger voters. So given those statistics, how can you, in these challenging times, be motivated to act? How can you motivate your family, your friends, your loved ones to get involved? And the coronavirus environment has really transformed 16 states already who have either postponed or they have canceled their primaries outright. And I would direct you to a site such as the one here, All In Together. And this is a site for women who are leading change, but it doesn't matter whether you're a woman, doesn't matter whether you're a man, but what it matters is that this site provides you the information by city, by state, by district or territory of what are the COVID election rules in my municipality, where can I register to vote, who is my elected representative, and how can I contact that individual. There's also another site, When We All Vote, which was co-founded by the former First Lady of the United States, Michelle Obama. And you see here the link to this site. And this was designed to spur civic engagement at the ballot box. And the group has 4 specific goals. And I think these goals transcend partisan affiliation, but they are so quite important for all of us. 1, where do you register to vote? 2, when is your state or your commonwealth or your territory's presidential primary? 3, not only pledge to vote in the next election, but help 3 of your friends to register and do the same. 4th, find out when and where the next election is in your community. So much of this is focused on the federal election. We have township elections, we have citywide elections, we have countywide elections. Figure out when the next election is in your community. And 5, similar to the last group that we spoke about, get state by state voting information for where you live to motivate others to act. But so what do you do if you want to do more? How do you act if you want to do more? You need to pick up the phone and you need to call. Call your local board of elections, volunteer. Call your local party, the Democrat Party, the Republican Party, and ask how you can engage. Can they provide you with the names and the telephone numbers of those that you can engage with to set up a phone bank? As Javier mentioned, one of the ways that is really, really an excellent opportunity to engage is to knock on people's doors. We can't do that in this environment, but we can pick up our phone, we can use our email to do so. And I've also provided a link at the bottom of this slide here that really shows you soup to nuts of how do I, if I want to set up a phone bank, how do I do it? Who do I get information from? How do I derive a script that I can use for those candidates running for local, city, state, and federal elections? And how can I tabulate those results to make sure that I'm being effective in what I'm doing? And the only thing I would say here is the most important thing as an informed and engaged advocate is whatever your message is, do it with a smile. There's so much negativity in politics at all levels of government, and those who do it in a positive manner and do it with a smile often are rewarded with the results they're looking for. And research has indicated that reluctant voters can be changed into active voters. Those who are disinclined to vote can actually be motivated to vote if they're asked to do so. And so the Brookings Institution has come out with an excellent publication, and I have provided a link to the opening chapter of why voter mobilization matters. And it walks through how do you engage in a get out the vote effort? How do you really set forth one of those campaigns to make sure that your voice joins 10 others, which joins 30, which joins 50, which joins so many more. UNICEF, believe it or not, has 2 very interesting publications that came out both in February this year as well as this month. Pandemic Participation, Youth Activism Online in the COVID Crisis Scenario. You can take a look at that link and see what you can specifically do to get engaged online. They also have Digital Civic Engagement by Young People, a publication which I found to be equally as insightful. So finally, as we look at the last slide, I really would point out the 3 attributes on the left as you engage in your activism. Your tone, humility, your content. The most effective lobbyist in town or around the world is a gifted educator. Be that educator, be that voice. And the last one, the format. If you can go through in a very short, a very concise, but yet a very coherent message, your message is going to be heard and folks are going to be compelled to act on what you have asked them to do. So I thank you very, very much. John, I'm going to turn it over to you. We thank you all for your interest here today, and we look very, very much forward to hearing your questions and your comments in the next engagement of this very important 2020 Town Hall. John, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Ron and Javier. We've had to say goodbye to Congresswoman Lowey, and I appreciate and thanks to all of the folks who've submitted questions. And so I would want to start with a couple of the questions that were related, and this would be both for Javier and for Ron. But a couple of questions which were, what are the 1 or 2 most important things, particularly for people who are already registered, who are already engaged folks, and maybe have one comment that would be more focused on New York in particular, and one that might be more general. But what are some of the most important things that or most impactful things that people can do in this over this period between now and the election? And maybe we'll start with Javier first and then jump to Ron.
Sure. I think there's several things that could happen. I think right now in the short term, as we're living through the pandemic, one of the core things is how do you, if you are in a place where you can provide mutual aid to your neighbors and to your support network. So really thinking through that. I think a lot of folks have really taken the opportunity to do that, and I think that's critically necessary. As we talk about in organizing, how do we actually increase the voter turnout? Relational organizing is one of the key components of that, right? Like, who do you know in your network? How do you connect to all of them? And really start thinking through all those different circles and then start engaging them. There's a lot of missed opportunities. Some people just don't think that they can actually go and engage with different people that they know, or through different connections, either through school, church, place of worship, wherever it is. There's a lot of different relationships. And I think our sense here is that I have a sense that we need to fundamentally shift the way things are happening in this country, and that we should not be losing those opportunities to engage with those individuals and asking them to join you in doing voter engagement. I think one of the main things that impacts communities of color, primarily the Latinx community, is that we just don't turn out to vote in the numbers that we need to do. So part of it is that we just don't have inspiring candidates that are talking to our communities. The other part is that they never hear from people that look like us. So our job is to really engage in that way.
That's great. Thank you. And Ron.
I will pivot off of that. I think it's very important for all of us to go out and vote, but particularly people who are in communities of color, to make sure that their voices are best represented, whether that be in New York, in the tri-state area, or around the United States. To pick up on the question that was asked, John, I would say this. Growing up as a kid, I used to love watching this cartoon on Saturday morning called Schoolhouse Rock. In Schoolhouse Rock, what do they always say at the very start of the cartoon? Knowledge is power. And for those of you on this town hall, I would say to you, knowledge is power. The more knowledge that you can display to those who you're trying to engage with will really help your efforts to mobilize them to act. So in other words, if you are interested in clean water, make sure that you understand all that you can about the Clean Water Act. What are the statutes that are on the books? Are there things that Congress is doing right now that you can mobilize people to inform their members of Congress to be engaged? How can you find a way to get engaged in an online petition to lawmakers? One thing that they don't have, their commodity, is time. But if you engage at the right time and display the knowledge base that you have and compel them to act, they're going to be much more receptive to your campaign, to your advocacy, if you have taken the time to do the homework, you've taken the time to educate yourself and those who are engaging in this campaign to say, here are the stakes, here are the facts, and here is what we would specifically like you to do. You always have to look at the end when you start. What is your end result? How do you define success and work back from that to achieve a successful outcome?
Great, thank you. We had another question that was asking about overcoming polarization. So, particularly if you looked at a whole range of issues, one of the key markers of people's, whether it's their belief about COVID or climate change or other things, is that these are issues around which there is partisan polarization. So how in this period are there strategies that are not just recruiting like-minded people to become more civically engaged, but how do you reach out to across kind of the chasm of political polarization to actually speak to and address different folks? And maybe we could start with Ron this time.
Thank you very much, John. I think this is a missed opportunity by leaders in all of our political classes. I was in the White House in 9/11. I remember the tone in Washington on the September 12th, September 14th, and the months that followed. We came together not as Republicans, Democrats, or independents. We came together as Americans. We had the opportunity in this case to put aside our partisan differences and say, this isn't a Republican priority, this isn't a Democratic priority, this is an American priority. And leaders at the same time still have that opportunity. I, for one, would like to see President Trump tone down his rhetoric to find a way to bridge support with Speaker Pelosi and to bridge support with Vice President Joe Biden, and to come together and show the American people that we can function in very difficult times. But they need to hear that from us, right? They're not going to take the initiative on their own. They need to hear that from us. So if it's one thing that we can all do, we can reach out to our representatives, we can reach out to our elected officials and say, put aside the partisanship, put aside the rank, I'm on this jersey or I'm wearing that team, and put on the American jersey and find a way to get all of our American loved ones through this terrible pandemic.
Thanks, Javier.
Yeah, I think in general, I'm in support of to what Ron was saying. I think one thing that is harder for the constituency I represent is that many times people just want to exclude us at all and don't see us as the us. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that is impacting our community during this time, is that they want to see that this is one time an opportunity of an issue that's impacting everybody. And instead of seeing the collective whole and who's being impacted, like, our members are just much as New Yorkers as anybody else. And the policies that are being put forward are excluding of them getting any support or relief. And that tension lives all the time. So I think I'm all for creating ways for us to think through and be bipartisan to find solutions, but it cannot come at the expense of us being excluded from that bigger us. And that's, I think, something that we all gotta work on.
Great. There's another question, particularly about youth engagement, and some of the data that Ron showed highlighted that the Sanders campaign had been very successful at turning out youth. So one of the questions we have here, it's kind of two issues. One is, what are the most important things to build on the increase in youth turnout that we saw that happened in the 2018 midterms? And secondly, how to build on those folks who were turned out in the Democratic primaries, in particular, to continuing sustaining this mobilization, particularly for young people, into this 2020 election cycle. And Javier, maybe we'll start with you this time.
Sure. I think one thing is that Senator Sanders was able to speak to some of the frustrations, anxieties, and fears that a lot of young people are facing in this country at this time. And not only discussing and talking about them, but really figuring out what could be potential solutions to those, to their needs. And I think that was one of the most critical components. I think that he was taking a long-term approach about some of the structural change that has to happen, because the status quo just no longer works for young people. A lot of you that are like me, Wagner grads, we're still paying a lot of debt to go to school. And that is something that it has impacted generations. And we need to think through what that could be like. So I think really thinking some of the core issues that is impacting youth, acknowledging that those are the issues, but really presenting a vision of how you best address them is what has allowed Senator Sanders to engage them, and what we hope the other candidates do as well.
Thank you. And Ron.
John, I think you look at campaigns, and I think it's always about the foundation and building blocks. President Bush was able to gain re-election in 2004. Why? Because he was able to figure out who voted in specific neighborhoods. They were able to micro-target who voted and who was engaged. President Obama took that sort of foundation in his bid for the presidency and was able to micro-target even further of not only who voted, but let's look on this block and say which houses on this particular block voted. Then you look at the last campaign, 2016, and these candidates have been very wise to recognize, again, 37% of the voting demographic will be those young voters. They're going online. They're going to where the younger voters are and where they know that those ads that they place will be seen and heard, and that message processed. So how do you keep the momentum going? I think candidates would be wise. Certainly the RNC and the Trump campaign have spent multiple millions of going online to engage in get out the vote activities. And I think that's going to be very crucial between now and November of how do you mobilize voters, young people? How do you keep their interest engaged? And then ultimately, how do you keep that enthusiasm such that they actually show up on election day in this period of uncertainty to actually cast those ballots?
So we're coming to the end of the formal Q&A portion. We're still going to have some words from Jason Hollander around voter engagement and mobilization at NYU. But if I can ask for Javier and Ron to have just one short response each. Both of you have talked about kind of this move to we all live in a Zoom-averse at this particular moment and perhaps for the indefinite future. Where do you see the type of communities around relational organizing that Javier mentioned earlier, and Ron, you're talking about kind of online engagement? Are there particular places that you are seeing as being kind of convening and convergence places for people to construct the kind of virtual engagement efforts that are going to be central to this? And Ron will give you the first answer, and then we'll come to Javier.
Thank you, John. I think you're seeing that right now. In talking to my students, they certainly have gone to Zoom. They are chatting amongst themselves. They're inviting each other into different breakout rooms to have discussions about what they see is going on in the political stage. I look for more of that in the days to come. Certainly in our classes, we look to find ways for those who want to be engaged, those who want to mobilize, to have the NYU infrastructure via this virtual learning environment that we're in, have the ability to do so. So for those of you who are watching this, who are listening to this, reach out to your fellow students, reach out to your friends, join sessions together and mobilize. And by those building blocks, you will find that if you plant those seeds, they'll grow and your voice really will be heard in a way that many people expect in this sort of unknown and unreal environment will really germinate as we head towards November.
Great, thank you. And Javier, the last word.
Yeah, I think one thing that I just want to alert or highlight is that there is a digital divide here, and some constituencies are better ready and adept to be able to take advantage of these opportunities and be on Zooms, etc. A lot of our members are struggling with that. Some of them are struggling because they don't have their cell phone bills are now going through the roof. They don't have all data plans, etc., or they have to share spaces. So learning, one example, somewhere in Queens, one of our members lives in a basement. There's 8 people there. It's hard for their 4 kids to be able to learn, and they have to share the laptop, etc. So I just don't want to forget that there's that issue that is happening. I do think that there are opportunities to do so, and I think people are being creative to engage in using all the different vehicles. I think the good thing that I've seen over the last 6 weeks is the level of learning. I had first 8 weeks ago, if I were to do a Zoom call with the membership of Make the Road, it would have been very difficult to do and try to get everybody to get on, etc. And as we've gone through this, like now people understand how to mute themselves more and like use all the different technology. So I think there's going to be some learning and some opportunities, but also it does not, until we fundamentally address who is able to access those technologies, it will be, I'm concerned that like those that are more privileged to have it will be able to do better than those that don't.
Thank you very much. And thank you both to Ron and Javier for hanging around and answering the questions. And I want to just now quickly introduce Jason Hollander, who is Vice President NYU, leading NYU's efforts on voter registration, to talk a little bit about the kinds of things that are happening here at NYU. So turn it over to you, Jason.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. What is NYU Votes? Around the time of the 2018 midterm election, as it approached, I was asked to help create a team at NYU, and you're seeing some of our early designs that we used on that campaign, that would take our fairly scattershot civic engagement efforts at NYU and formalize them under one umbrella group, which we now call NYU Votes. And this was part of a recent trend happening at many schools across the country to increase student civic engagement. And my reaction when I was asked to try to achieve this goal was, wow, this will be so easy. I mean, who's more passionate about issues than college students? And I didn't know the data at the time, and Ron pointed this out very well earlier, but because apparently they are very passionate, but no, they do not turn out historically to vote. In fact, they're usually well below the national average. And the reasons for this are many, but one thing that's especially challenging here at NYU is that we have a large number of students who are studying away at global sites. We have a student body that comes in vast numbers from states other than New York. So we have this large population overall at the university that will have to vote absentee if they choose to in each election. And that is a complex process. The states have drastically different registration and voting rules. And if you get something even slightly wrong, your opportunity to vote can completely slip away. So how did we tackle this? Well, first, my excellent colleague, Chrissy Baluk in the NYU Center for Student Life, she, along with several others on campus, personally registered more than 1,500 students face-to-face in the fall of 2018. And that's not a quick process typically. Another personalized approach we used was to send targeted emails to students from every single state, outlining for them the rules for their particular state's registration and absentee process. That was actually quite helpful because the students felt like we were speaking directly to them and to their needs. We also made a series of videos. We did postering, we did tabling. We held promotional events giving away thousands of cookies and donuts and slices of pizza. I may have sampled a couple of the donuts just to make sure they were okay. We also handed out thousands of NYU Votes stickers and buttons, and those were quite popular. We saw students wearing them on the subways and stores. Even someone told me they saw someone at a mall in Long Island wearing their NYU Votes button. So words of the effort spread, and we even had Fox 5 local news come to the campus and do a story about how these students were being engaged. And it felt like we were changing things. So where did this actually lead? Well, here are the numbers, and Ron alluded to these earlier, but in the 2014 midterms, the national turnout for all eligible voters was 42%. And according to a study from Tufts University, the national voting rate for college students across the country was 19%. So 42% for all eligible, 19 for college students. Where was NYU in 2014? At 9%, single digits. So we were concerned about that, as you can imagine. Fast forward to this effort in 2018. That year, the national turnout went up. It was 53%. And because of this groundswell of college efforts, the national college number also went up considerably from 19 to 39%. NYU stuck down here at 9. We were happy to say we more than quadrupled up to 37%. So now we're a hair behind the national average for college voting, but we're very close. And another bright sign is that our student registration rate also improved from 61 to 72%. Again, this is a synopsis, but this took a village. This took deans and administrators and absolutely tons of students who were really invested to all come together to accomplish this in 2018. But it told us something: we can accomplish this. It works. It works for NYU, and it's working for higher ed in general. But we all have a way to go, and I really love the all-in college democracy challenge goal is every single student votes, 100%. 37, 57, whatever that. Let's get it to 100. That's our goal. And now, unfortunately, as we know, current circumstances have complicated how we're going to spread the word and organize for the fall. But we do have an ambitious and coordinated effort that's underway. We're figuring out how we'll negotiate that in the coming months. But I would ask anyone who's interested in being involved as a student, as an NYU community member, whatever you want to do. If you have ideas, if you have energy, we'd love to have your participation. We'll figure out exactly what that is in the coming months. You could email me directly at jason.hollander@nyu.edu if you have any thoughts or suggestions. And I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much, our wonderful participants here, Javier and Ron and Jason and Nita, who's gone, David, our president of Wagner Student Association. Look, no doubt there is a lot that is painful right now, a lot that all of us are struggling with, not being where we want to be with who we want to be. But this evening, or wherever you are, perhaps night, is really about hope. It's about hope and a belief in the future, and that future is something that we can affect. We are not simply victims. We are not simply passive here as the world spins around us out of control. It can feel that way at the moment. And for many of you who are actually struggling with illness or within your family, it certainly feels that way. Don't let that overwhelm you. You are critical to the future, not only of this country, but of the world. This is for yourself, for your own self-interest, for your family, for your community. Democracy is being challenged, and you are one of those necessary to ensure its preservation. There is so much work to do. You heard about it in so many different ways tonight. We're going to send you the PowerPoint so you have all those URLs. Every single person listening here, you can affect the change that is necessary to protect and defend this country and protect democracy around the world. Thank you all so much. Have a great night. You know, we are really together in this, and hopefully we'll be able to do this sometime in the not distant future. We'll be able to do this, all of us together. Thank you and good night.